Russia is finished. The final hour has begun. A terrifying storm of Ukrainian rockets and drones is ripping the occupier to shreds. Factories burn, refineries explode, power grids collapse, and entire garrisons are breaking apart in panic. This is not a warning anymore. It's the end for the invader. Relentless strikes from our skies and precision systems are turning front lines into funeral pyres. Nowhere is safe and nowhere to hide. Allies are lining up to deliver the knockout blows. Fresh arsenals, crippling sanctions, and an iron will to finish what has begun. In the Kremlin, they scream in desperation as missiles close in and the reality of defeat becomes unavoidable. The new weapons leave nothing but ash where enemy positions once stood. This is Ukraine's hellish revenge, brutal, unstoppable, and historic. All the details in our special edition of Hotspot. This is hellish revenge indeed. More and more factories across Russia are shutting down. Everything is burning, gasoline is running out, and there's no power at all. While the authorities as always lie that everything is calm and going according to plan. How many more explosions will it take for this mask to be ripped off the Kremlin's face? All the details in our next report.
What is that?
Mom! Mom!
It was a restless night in Bataysk Rostov region. Even there, the friendly drones arrived on the night of October 21st. Oh.
Damn, I was so scared that it would come to us.
It is reported that Bataysk is a major railway and sorting hub. But what's also interesting is that Russians themselves are now suggesting where Ukrainian drones should fly. Guys, not here. You need to hit the Kremlin. You got the coordinates wrong. Meanwhile, the largest Orenburg gas processing plant and Novokubishevsk oil refinery completely halted operations after the Ukrainian drone attack. Although in Russia itself, they say something different.
In Orenburg, it's a classic case. The Russian Ministry of Emergency Situations denied there was a fire at the gas plant, but immediately sent firefighters there to put out the blaze. Of course, in Russia, the truth has long been forbidden. When everything is burning, but the reports say everything is calm.
And the plants probably won't be up and running again anytime soon. After all, according to reports, restoration work won't begin until at least the start of November.
So what is the main objective? To paralyze as many energy facilities in the Russian Federation as possible to create an imbalance. For example, to take out as many facilities as possible in the central part of the Russian Federation, which is exactly what's happening now with all sorts of substations, so that facilities in other regions of the Russian Federation become overloaded and experience oversaturation.
13 occupiers eliminated. Special Operations Forces fighters infiltrated behind enemy lines and destroyed enemy positions. Meanwhile, Trump announced a new secret weapon.
There is a weapon that many people don't even know about, and I started working on it 4 years ago.
Of course, Trump couldn't help but emphasize the superiority of the United States over China, including in terms of military technology.
The United States has a lot of developments, a wide variety of weapons, and all sorts of projects that are at different stages of implementation. Some are already in the final stages, some are only halfway through, and some are just being planned on paper. But due to the economic superiority of the United States, once again, they have many different potential projects. Again, scale is an issue here. They can produce 1 or 2 prototypes and boast that they already have them, but here the real question is about quantity.
Meanwhile, as Russian drones continue to violate European airspace, the German Chancellor announced the creation of a federal unit to combat drones and a center for UAV protection.
This is a good sign. It's a good sign that at least something is being done in Europe to counter the Russian threat, because no one knows what to do about Russian drones, but here at least some steps have been taken. How they will be implemented, when they will be implemented, how quickly, how effectively, remains to be seen, but in any case, it's a positive development. This shows that they understand, they recognize the threat, they realize that right now they don't have the resources.
Meanwhile, the French Foreign Ministry announced that Ukraine will receive a loan from the EU to purchase defense equipment for the next 3 years.
But let's be honest, Putin's presence on the territory of the European Union only makes sense if it leads to an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. Moreover, Vladimir Putin is interested in adopting the principle of an immediate ceasefire because time is working against him.
Plus, there's another country joining the Pearl program. Previously, Italy had refrained from participating, having its own reasons, but now the country's position has been reconsidered.
Perhaps when Italy first refused to participate in this program, they thought the project wouldn't take off, that it wasn't viable, that it wouldn't last, and that it was all just nonsense. But upon closer inspection, it turned out that it is taking off, it's being funded, interesting developments are emerging, and the countries participating in these projects are gaining access to technologies, sharing data with Ukraine, and it's quite possible that some kind of jealousy was at play in Italy.
Russia continues to strike peaceful Ukrainian cities. On the night of October 21st, 6 Russian glide bombs hit Kharkiv. 11 people are known to have been injured. In Kherson, 3 people were injured as a result of a drone attack. And after the drone attack, Chernihiv was left completely without electricity and water.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Ukraine is tightening the noose around occupied Crimea, and life for Russians and collaborators is becoming unbearable. Fuel reserves are collapsing, with even diesel vanishing from gas stations. Precision Ukrainian strikes on enemy radar and command systems are paving the way for deeper attacks on Russia's military and energy infrastructure. The illusion of the secure Crimea has shattered. The peninsula is now under constant threat, and panic among the occupiers grow by the hour. How much longer can the Kremlin hold on before everything falls apart? The answer in our next report.
After a hard, long, and exhausting journey, filled with many challenges and moments that tested their endurance and spirit, Crimea and Sevastopol are now returning to their home harbor, a place that has always symbolized safety, belonging, and the comfort of familiar shores.
And that harbor is Ukraine. Crimea is being cut off from the Russian Federation, and the collapse of the Crimean Bridge is just a matter of time, according to Western publications. There is already a total fuel crisis on the peninsula. Some areas have been left without electricity. There isn't enough air defense even for the most important sites, and those that remain in the chaos are now shooting down their own planes.
We note that as a military base, Crimea is becoming more and more inconvenient for Russia because there is no water.
So, the past few days have marked a new reality of life on the peninsula. The key event was a series of strikes in the area of Vardiska, where after precise hits, a massive explosion broke out. This is the largest oil depot in the area. According to locals, the burning depot in Vardiska could be seen from the suburbs of Simferopol, with the glow visible for many kilometers.
In Vardiska there were strikes not only on the oil depot but also on the military airfield, as well as on the Russian garrison station there.
According to information circulating online, an ammunition depot on the garrison's territory was also hit. In addition, the oil depot near Feodosia has also partially ceased operations. Due to several attacks just this month, 11 fuel tanks have been completely destroyed, as confirmed by satellite images.
Why is the story about the Feodosia oil depot so important? It's not just that it burned down on its own, it burned down with the fuel that was stored in those tanks. And that will be very difficult to restore. It's unclear what exactly was there. Diesel fuel or gasoline. But if it was gasoline, which is most likely, it means that the crisis this week in occupied Crimea will be much worse than it was the week before. So we wait.
At the same time, each such strike is notable for the fact that it's almost impossible to extinguish the fire. Experts say the burning fuel spreads across the facility, igniting neighboring tanks, and so the fire can go on for days.
The landscapes of Feodosia adorn almost the entire eastern part of Crimea. They say the flames can be seen from 30 and in some places even 50 kilometers away. Everything, it is said, is burning to the ground. The facility needs to be shut down. This is a recommendation for the occupying Crimean authorities, who have also confirmed that there will be no gasoline.
There will be no diesel either, local authorities add. Local activists report that since the beginning of the week, diesel fuel has also disappeared in Crimea. Under these circumstances, the promise of the head of the occupying Crimean administration, Sergei Aksyonov, to stabilize the fuel supply situation is simply impossible to fulfill, added Z propagandist Alexander Sergeyev. At the same time, the authorities are desperately trying to conceal the real picture of what is happening in Crimea. Thus, just over the past weekend, police officers drew up at least 4 administrative reports against residents of the peninsula for posts on social media. People in particular were outraged by the lack of fuel. Interestingly, Russians themselves are partly helping the Ukrainian armed forces to identify targets in Crimea. Experts have analyzed that now these targets can be found simply by opening maps on the internet.
Remember when Yandex Maps started blurring all sorts of strategic sites? I said that now it's absolutely clear where exactly to strike. Well, my friends from Inform Napalm noticed that the Special Operations Forces did exactly that. The territory of the oil depot in Gvardiskoye was blurred on Yandex, but for some reason that didn't help against the strikes. Mystical. Once again, thanks to all the Russian decisions that help increase the effectiveness of Ukrainian strikes, blurring military sites on Yandex Maps is definitely one of them.
Another decision that has contributed to the irregular strikes in Crimea is the work of the defense forces targeting Russian air defense sites on the peninsula. For example, the day before, the main intelligence directorate managed to strike the occupier's newest radar system. We're talking about the Valday complex, which was developed to detect small drones.
The security service of Ukraine continues to systematically reduce the enemy's military, logistical and economic capabilities to do anything, both in occupied Crimea and in other occupied territories, and even on Russian territory itself. But Crimea suffers the most because the air defense system there was deliberately destroyed, their ability to defend themselves was reduced, and now we are working as if inside the body.
By the way, so that the occupiers in Crimea don't get the impression that everything will still work out, along with oil depots and military equipment, the Ukrainian armed forces also didn't forget about the equipment that supplies electricity. Russian bases. In several regions of the peninsula, Ukrainian defenders organized blackouts.
At night in Crimea, several electrical substations were put out of commission. And in particular, the main power substation in Jankoy, or Jankong, as we used to call it in Crimea. So now rolling blackouts are being introduced. And here Putin is being shown in very concrete terms, yet again, that if he continues to strike Ukraine's energy infrastructure, the occupiers in Crimea will be left without electricity and fuel.
And the cherry on top? During one of the latest attacks, the Russian air defense crews got so nervous that they started firing at everything in sight. As a result, one less Russian fighter jet worth about $50 million.
During a nighttime attack by Ukrainian drones, Russian forces shot down their own Su-30SM aircraft. This happened right in the area of the Gvardiskoye airfield.
At the same time, there's no good news for the occupiers when it comes to air defense. Analysts note that recently there have been more strikes on Russian territory itself, prompting a decision to partially redeploy air defense systems from Crimea back to Russia for protection.
Trump's political pendulum is swinging again, and this time it's moving away from Putin. After giving Kyiv a cold dose of reality, the unpredictable US president now seems ready to freeze out Moscow as well. Global headlines are exploding with reports that because of Putin's hardline position, his meeting with Trump in Budapest may be scrapped or delayed indefinitely. The intrigue deepens. The latest developments from Washington, the Kremlin and Bankova are coming up next.
Is Putin fooling Trump again, or is Kremlin diplomacy simply preserving tradition? The so-called summit between the Russian dictator and the American president, which according to the latter was supposed to take place in 2 weeks, has been postponed indefinitely. The preliminary meeting between the two sides, represented by Lavrov and Rubio and allegedly scheduled for October 23rd, has already been cancelled. According to CNN, during a phone conversation between the representatives, it turned out that they see the solution to the problem in completely different ways. After this information appeared in the media, Lavrov himself responded. He essentially confirmed that the Russians, as before, are sticking to their position.
I want to officially confirm that Russia has not changed its position compared to the understandings reached during the lengthy negotiations between Putin and Trump in Alaska. These understandings are based on the agreement that was reached at that particular time, which President Trump very succinctly and clearly expressed when he stated that what is truly needed is a long-term, sustainable and lasting peace, rather than simply an immediate ceasefire that would ultimately lead nowhere and accomplish nothing. We remain fully and unwaveringly committed to this formula, and we continue to stand by it as the best path forward for achieving a meaningful and enduring resolution to the conflict.
Peskov also joined in echoing his Kremlin colleagues' fabrications. They say, how can you implement something that was never agreed upon?
You can't postpone something that was never set in stone. Something that was never set in stone. Neither President Trump nor President Putin ever specified exact timelines. Preparation is needed, serious preparation. You heard statements from both the American side and ours that this may take time. Therefore, no specific dates were ever established from the very beginning, at any point.
At the same time, vague statements are coming out of Moscow, not in favor of Putin's visit to Budapest. They say that the trip is unsafe for the aging dictator, since there is a risk of assassination by intelligence agencies. The journey to Hungary is a long one, and in general, the Poles, who have said they could arrest Putin, are capable of terrorist acts.
It is possible to assume that disagreements arose between Lavrov and Rubio. They were unable to reach an agreement on some important issue that needed to be brought to the leaders for approval. This is absolutely realistic and possible. But on the other hand, there may be other underlying factors at play here. This is more in the style of Russian diplomacy, to create confusion once again, make the situation uncertain, and then boldly and courageously go to the meeting to resolve certain issues. In other words, to give up yet another minor and non-essential position.
Meanwhile, Volodymyr Zelensky is planning to attend the meeting of the Coalition of the Willing, which partners are hastily organizing in London on October 24th. The media, citing a draft of the European Union's conclusions, report that at the meeting, European leaders will confirm their decision to provide financial support to Ukraine over the next 3 years using frozen Russian assets.
Obviously, the expectation is not that we will be fighting for 3 years. The expectation is to put pressure on Russia at these negotiations. That's the real calculation. The main goal is to force Russia to listen to Ukraine's demands. To say, look, Ukraine has 140 billion plus its own funds plus resources from our partners. Altogether, this could amount to 200 to 300 billion over 3 years. These are extremely comparable sums to what Russia currently has.
In addition, according to media reports, Italy will soon join NATO's initiative to purchase American weapons for Ukraine. Previously, its authorities were opposed to this. With the frozen Russian funds, Ukrainians also plan to purchase 25 Patriot systems from the United States, which will protect Ukrainian cities from attacks by the Russian army.
As Washington waits its next move, Europe stands unwavering, united in its commitment to Ukraine and ready to strike at the Kremlin with a new wave of devastating measures. The goal is clear: to cripple Putin's regime, if not on the battlefield, then through economic suffocation. This Thursday, the EU is set to approve its 19th sanctions package, while member states move toward a total cutoff from Russian gas and decisive action on frozen Russian billions. One by one, the Kremlin's vital arteries are being severed, and time is running out. More on this in our report.
Europe is demonstrating resolve. 3 major decisions are coming very soon: a new package of sanctions, a rejection of Russian oil and gas, and even the use of Russian assets. The EU is tightening pressure on Russia, knowing that the terrorist state only responds to force.
We are seeing Trump's efforts to establish peace in Ukraine. Of course, all these efforts are welcome, but we do not see Russia truly striving for peace. Russia only understands force and negotiates only when it is truly compelled to do so. That is why, of course, we are discussing what else we can do.
The new package of sanctions in the EU will be approved as early as Thursday, October 23rd. This is the conviction of the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Kaja Kallas. The package will differ from the previous ones. The restrictions will affect 3 key areas at once: energy, financial services, and trade. The change in approach to sanctions was already mentioned at the beginning of October by the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. According to her, the EU will no longer propose phased sanctions, but instead wants tougher measures. However, quick results should not be expected. The new restrictions are designed for the long term.
It cannot be said that the 19th package of sanctions, which is still expected to be adopted this week, is truly groundbreaking, since a number of its provisions are delayed in effect. Well, for example, the refusal of Russian LNG starting from 2027. And we have to understand we are now in October 2025. Accordingly, there is still more than a year of transition period left.
Things did not go smoothly with this package. The main obstacle, unexpectedly enough, turned out to be Austria. Vienna had previously refused to agree to new restrictions unless the European Union unlocked part of the Russian assets to compensate Austria's Raiffeisenbank for fines imposed by a Russian court. But no one supported Austria's demands, and the Austrians radically changed their position. Surprisingly, even Hungary is not planning to block the new package.
We have no plans to block it. We managed to remove all measures that would contradict our national interests.
Trump's actions, his successes in the Middle East, all of this creates an additional political backdrop and a certain incentive for some opponents within the EU itself to, well, talk less about blocking anti-Russian sanctions. For example, we can see that Hungary has ultimately given in, but obviously there are also the direct relations between Orban and Trump.
However, while Hungary did not block the 19th package of sanctions, it did try to influence the decision to abandon Russian gas and oil. Slovakia did the same. The day before, the EU Council supported the complete abandonment by the European Union of Russian fossil fuels. The decision was supported by an overwhelming majority of votes, but not Hungary and Slovakia. However, their vote was not that important.
Fundamental decisions must be made by unanimous agreement. Meaning, yes, by all 27 members of the European Union. But for a number of specific issues, a qualified majority is considered sufficient. That is 55% of EU member states in the European Union, representing more than 65% of the EU population. Therefore, in this case, we understand that a number of issues are still being shifted to the level of a qualified majority.
The proposal in question provides for a legally binding ban on any imports of gas from Russia, including liquefied natural gas, after January 1st, 2028. At the same time, imports of new gas from Russia will be prohibited starting January 1st, 2026. However, for existing contracts, a transition period is provided. Short-term contracts until June 2026 and long-term contracts until the beginning of 2028. The EU Council, as we have already mentioned, supported the proposal despite two obstacles. Now the matter is up to the European Parliament. It must approve the document, but these are not the only blows to the economy of the aggressor country. In addition to future revenues, Europe also plans to seize the Kremlin's current funds. We are talking about frozen Russian assets. Part of this money is planned to be used to provide Ukraine with a loan.
This is not about confiscation. In other words, they are working out a way that would allow the use of the principal of these assets, but at the same time not confiscate them. So if or when the Russian Federation pays reparations to Ukraine, access to these very assets will then be restored.
According to Western publications, work on this issue intensified after the talks between Trump and Zelensky on October 17th. Allegedly, the president of Ukraine was pressured by the American leader, and it seems that the EU has decided to become more assertive so that they too are taken into account. Already this week, politicians will try to reach an agreement on the use of frozen Russian assets.
They will definitely discuss it. I don't expect a decision just yet, since there is still time according to previous agreements. But it's clear that for the budget years 2026 and 2027, it will be necessary to adopt serious consolidated options. And we fully understand that at this point in time, the West simply has no other choice but to go down the path of a reparations loan for Ukraine, because the funding required is truly extraordinarily large.
Whether European politicians will be able to reach an agreement remains an open question. But Europe's determination in its recent actions gives hope. The EU is not going to unquestioningly listen to Trump, but is ready to provide help and take action.
Meanwhile, the Iron Hunter is back on the job. Sting, a new nightmare for the enemy. This interceptor drone crashes into battle and leaves nothing but ash in its wake. Targets obliterated, no traces left behind. Observers watch its sorties in awe. Its effectiveness is staggering. 150 positions destroyed. The enemy is taking a crushing blow and is trying to pull its last units out. Hear the full details in our report right now.
At speeds exceeding 300 kilometers per hour. These are the movement parameters of the Ukrainian interceptor drone, Sting. The main goal of this little guy is to destroy Russian Shaheds, which the Kremlin is unleashing on Ukraine by the hundreds. Sting is a product entirely of the Ukrainian military industry. Its cost is about $2,500, which is several times cheaper than the Russian Shaheds. This is what makes this interceptor drone indispensable for Ukrainian air defense. Just a year ago, this method of shooting down Shaheds seemed impossible. Now, however, everything has changed dramatically.
What once seemed laughable has turned into an inexpensive and crucial element of Ukraine's defense. While Russia bombards its cities with increasingly powerful waves of explosive drones, Ukraine is more and more often using cheap interceptors to stop them. This weapon shot down 150 attack drones during a recent bombardment. Now Ukraine aims to produce 1,000 interceptors a day.
One of the world's leading news outlets, Business Insider, writes that interceptor drones like the Sting, which Ukraine is now actively producing, could turn the tide of the war because they cost much less than Shaheds.
There has always been and still is a search for cheap means to destroy the enemy's strike capabilities in the form of drones and missiles. And these interceptor drones, whose cost is actually approximately 10 times less than that of the strike drones used to attack civilian or military targets, have led to the scaling up of such solutions.
Since the beginning of 2024, Ukrainian drone engineers have been actively converting quadcopters into drones capable of destroying Shaheds.
The design of interceptor drones is rapidly evolving. For example, the Sting is equipped with a warhead that accelerates to 340 kilometers per hour using 4 rotating blades. This sensor-guided interceptor, produced by the Ukrainian drone manufacturer Wild Hornets, resembles a handheld rocket and is small enough to fit in a travel bag. Other interceptors look like small gliders. The crews responsible for launching them need to react instantly and decisively to any threats. The Sting pilot explained that his team typically heads out at night, often under the cover of darkness based on intelligence tips. They usually have only about 10 minutes to intercept and engage any approaching Russian drones before those drones move out of range.
The improvement of interceptor drones never stops, not even for a minute. Success rates vary from 30% for some interceptors to 80 or even 90%. Success depends on a large number of factors: the type of target, the timing of the interception, the pilot's skills, and many others. Interest in and demand for interceptors has surged sharply not only in Ukraine, but also among NATO countries after the first Russian drones crossed into Poland, especially since the Kremlin continues to invest huge amounts of money in the development and production of Shahed strike drones. Ukraine and NATO countries want to have an effective and, most importantly, inexpensive means of countering them.
We are currently negotiating with some pretty big, influential leaders in certain important sectors worldwide, companies that are interested in purchasing our drones. Some of the advanced technologies, for example, we have adopted from foreign partners we have worked with. We know they are integrated into our solution. And there is serious interest because we have the largest, unfortunately for us, but fortunately for the world, and for those who make weapons, the largest testing ground for military technologies in the world.
During one of the latest attacks on Ukraine, Russia launched almost 800 aerial targets. And according to Western intelligence estimates, the Kremlin may soon launch up to 2,000 Shaheds of various modifications. Moreover, the Shahed is being modernized in Russia, and in the future it may be able to reach speeds of up to 300 kilometers per hour. So the appearance of Ukrainian interceptor drones should simplify and make air defense operations more effective, especially since, from a financial standpoint, Ukrainian interceptors are cost-effective to use. And victory in war always comes down to economically sound decisions.
At this moment, that's all from me, Maria Ferfonova. Even more hellish Frontline news in our next episode. But for now, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. See you soon!